1914, an event occurs that completely changes everything about the future as it was seen at the time. And that event was?
World War One.
Good choice. Yes, it was World War One. World War One was a war in which 17 million people died at a time when the most that had been ever killed in a war was 600,000. That was the Civil War. So 17 million people were killed in a war that basically solved nothing. And it affected everything about society. So here we have some paintings from before the war in what was called the Edwardian era. Okay? Light and shadow, faces. This is called an expressionistic, but the face is still a recognizable face. More light and shadow, just reality. Okay? After that, we get other things. We get this. What's different?
It's not grimmer.
It's not just grim, it's ugly. These are not even people anymore. They're monsters. This is a complete change in the view of humanity in general. This was done by a German. But this is a German storming party in World War One. They're all wearing gas. They're not even human. There's no humanity left. The society that existed before is gone to the artists. And the artists are the ones who lead us into our new views. So here, try this out. This is a piece of art created in 1917, a little war. The name of it is Fountain. What is it?
It's a urinal upside down.
You are correct. It's a urinal from a men's room. Inside. And this was presented as art and accepted as art. In fact, this piece of art was voted by some group of 100 artists as the most important piece of art in the 20th century. I just showed you what artists think, but that's another story. Why? Why is this? What does this mean? Not just that. You're right that we're going into philosophies where there is no morality. It's just whatever you think. There's a little bit of that. This says that all art is literally excrement. That there is no art. The guy who did this, he went to a plumbing supply store and bought it. He didn't. The only artistic thing he did was write somebody else's name. This is actually an inside joke. The guy's name was Duchamp. And so that hit in 1970. That's the only, and that's it. And he submitted this as art, and like I said, it is thought of as the most influential piece of art in the 20th century. But this is a revulsion of art that we saw before. This is art is nothing. Art is worse than nothing. So that's a huge change. How the artists view everything. And let's see, it even goes into music. Let's see here. So this was about 1990. This is presented to this day as classical music over here. What can we say about this music? Huh? Minor key is actually, it's called atonal. Okay. We would not necessarily call it music. So this is complete rejection of the music of the Cold War. This says music is entirely superfluous. I'll do anything. Doesn't matter. And we can hear parts of that. In fact, the guy who wrote this, a guy named Schoenberg, on music theory, are still in. You can buy them on Amazon. They're still in public. He's thought of as the most influential composer of at least the first half of the 20th century. And here's the before the war, you would have never heard of this because the entire society was traumatized. Hundreds of thousands of Americans, millions of Germans and Frenchmen, millions of Chinese, and so forth. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's just here's another piece of magic, right? The war comes, kills lots of people, and there's all these other side effects. This is what you got to think about when you think about your future. There are side effects that's why if you look at the last thing, it says, what's the music like? What's the this like? Because whatever you decide has changed will have ripples everywhere. Oh, the other thing about World War I is it's the first time that the governments try to completely control the flow of information to their people. In every country that was at war, including the United States, where you were not allowed to print things that the government didn't approve. That's a whole different change, even in this country, especially in this country, to the power of the press. That the government has power over the press, period. That you can say, there's a war on it, you can do anything you like. We saw this in this country in the early part of the 2000s, where suddenly the government could say and do anything because, there's terrorists. So you have to watch, so that's another ripple of effect that you have to worry about. I got two things to talk about, and I'm trying to decide which one first. You want to hear about the Spanish flu first, or about Woodrow Wilson? Spanish flu. In mid-1918, before the war was over, a very, very, very deadly version of the flu broke out. It's called Spanish flu because it was thought to have originated in Spain. It didn't originate in China. And it went everywhere. And it killed 50 million people. That's a lot. That's more people than were killed in the war. There were 3 different strains of the flu it's thought today. So it starts in China. And the reason that it spreads all over the world is because Chinese laborers were imported into Canada and the United States and Europe to do work for the war because there's a war on. And if people didn't recognize it, they said, they're sick, they'll be fine later. No, they died. The first version of the flu, you could die, but it was like the flu that we would recognize today. There was a second wave of the flu. It's listed here as a second wave, where you would die in less than a day after you started showing symptoms. You would start coughing, and the next day you were dead. Now, what effect does that have on people? The average lifespan in the United States in 1918 dropped for men 12 years. Your expectancy of life was 12 years less than in 1917. For women, like, what effect does that have? When we talk about an apocalypse, one of your assignments is an apocalypse. One of them could be a plague. What kind of effect does that have on people? Where not only is your life expectancy low, it's a lot lower than it was last year. What happens?
They start living for the now instead of
That's basically right. Okay? Suddenly the future doesn't really matter. Okay? If you think you're going to die this year or this week or tomorrow, your whole view on life just completely changed. A plague that was kind of like that in this country.
There's a bunch.
I think it was about 30 years. Huh? No. Typhoid fever is more maybe 7 years ago. But this is like 30 years ago, 1980. Right. Age, okay? To a very select, narrow group of people, basically the gay population. It was a plague that killed, and the problem was that you would get it, not know it, and suddenly 8 or 9 years later, you'd start dropping dead. And so from their point of view, they didn't know that they had a disease because nobody knew it was a disease. And suddenly they start dropping dead. And the whole LGBT movement really starts from that time. The whole radical movement starts from that time. Because suddenly they thought that they were being denied a cure, which wasn't true, but that's what they thought. Because of who they were. There's a whole different thing with the plague. There's another plague that we have yet to see, but we have had a couple of scares in the last 3 or 4 years. Correct. Okay. Ebola. You catch it, a couple days later, you bleed out your eyes and ears and everywhere else you can bleed out of, and you die. And nobody knows how to cure it. You got it, you either live, and if you live, you don't enjoy it, or you die. And anybody who comes to your funeral and touches your body, they die. And anybody in the hospital that you happen to get to, they probably die. That's why every time there's an Ebola outbreak in Africa, everybody goes bananas. Because all they have to do is get a couple of people to get on a plane, or anywhere, and it's everywhere. Think about that when you come around to your. So the average lifespan in the United States, 10 years. This is if what's your average lifespan? Somebody's all right. Let's say that, and then somebody said, "Oh, by the way, your lifespan is now 62. Congratulations." What are you going to miss? Well, you're going to miss out on Social Security entirely, right? So why would you bother to do? You're not going to live to see your grandchildren. Too bad. Sorry. Well, it depends on how quickly you get around to it. But I mean, it's chopping off a significant fraction of your life. And the reason that is because a lot of people are dying today. So you might die today. Everybody know who Woodrow Wilson was? President of the United States during World War I. What you may not know is that he was a lot sicker than anybody knew. And the reason that nobody knew it was because he and his close associates chose it. 1896, Woodrow Wilson has his first known stroke. And you know what stroke is? Blood clot in the brain, what happened? What? Well, there's more than that. Parts of your brain die. And so a lot of people who have a stroke, one side of their body stops working. They get paralyzed on one side, depending on where the clot is. A lot of people have, as we will see, so 10 years later, he has another stroke. Permanently blind in one eye. Just that part of his brain just stopped working. And people noticed that he suddenly had impatient, he was jumpy, he was an unhappy man. Okay. 1913, but he discontinued. He doesn't tell anybody about it. He's the president of Princeton University. He's the governor of New Jersey. And then in 1913, he's inaugurated president of the United States. In April, a month after he's inaugurated, another stroke. Described to the press as neuritis, whatever the hell that is. And his first wife dies. He remarries. And then suddenly in August of 1915, he's rushed by car from Washington, back in the days when there weren't all these major highways, to see an eye specialist in Philadelphia. It's probably he had another stroke. But we don't know because nobody told him. So he was reelected in November 6, 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And then 5 months later, he brought us into the war. So let's see here. He goes off to Europe and negotiates the Treaty of Versailles. We'll talk about the League of Nations in a second. His doctor removes what are called polyps from his nose. That's cancer. Another one in September catches influenza, but it's probably the third strain, the one that was even less deadly than the other. Okay, so anybody know what the League of Nations was?
It was basically the head of every single nation just keeps out.
Sort of. It was supposed to be what the United Nations is supposed to be now, and isn't either. It's supposed to keep the peace. And it was supposed to be, it wasn't the head of, but it was a representative of that. They would all meet in an assembly and they would discuss and make speeches and resolutions and all that. And so he was a champion of that and wanted the United States to be part of it. Well, the Congress was not all that interested because they saw that as a way for us to get drawn into another war. So we're part of the League of Nations and Europe goes to war again. League charter says we have to go help. We don't really want to do that. So he goes on a whistle stop tour. He goes by train around the United States to try and give speeches and get the local voters to convince their representatives to do what he sees as the right thing. He suffers a mild stroke in Pueblo, Colorado. He is taken directly back to Washington and into the White House. And 4 days later, he suffers a major stroke. Left side is paralyzed. He's now blind in his right eye, as well as his left. He's got a little bit of sight. He's completely isolated from the entire government. Nobody in the cabinet knows. Nobody in the Congress knows. Nobody in the press knows. Nobody anywhere. His wife begins acting as chief executive. This is illegal. But she wanted to do it. The only official word ever given was his condition continues to improve. That's it. Don't worry, his condition continues to improve. But no, you can't see it. And in December, there's a very carefully staged bedside meeting with exactly 2 congressmen who are basically in. He says something, and then they leave. And they say, he's fine. He catches the pneumonia again. And Mrs. Wilson continues to insist that he's okay, but you can't see him. He is presented with a compromise from the Congress to allow the United States to join the League of Nations. He rejects it. He says, no compromise, do it my way or no way else. Congress votes it down. We don't join the League of Nations. Everything that happens after that, World War II, and everything that follows, can be thought of as being part of him not being willing to compromise and getting us into the league, even as in some way other than a major player. We're completely left out of everything that went on in Europe and in Asia. So the Japanese see that we're not interested, and they rise up, and we wind up fighting them in World War II. The Germans know that they don't have to worry about an American intervention in any way. Everything changes because he had a stroke and no one would tell anybody. His vice president would not even consider taking over unless Wilson's doctor and his wife, for some reason, signed a piece of paper that said he was unable to do his job. They refused to do so. He refused to take over. That's it. So here's another thing of magic. Okay? He has a stroke. The right thing to do is for him to step down and somebody else to take the job. Seems to be pretty reasonable. His wife decides that she doesn't want that. His doctor goes along. And the rest of the 20th century is different. That's magic. Now, I want you to think about something else that happened right recently. Remember Sunday? Hillary Clinton suddenly leaves the ceremony at Ground Zero. You saw that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. She left and passed out. But no, she didn't. Disappeared for 90 minutes, then reappeared for about 10 minutes, and then disappeared for another 2 days. Everything's fine. Okay? And I noticed this in one of the stories. Okay? A blood thinner named Coumadin. You know what that's for? To avoid strokes. So she takes this thyroid hyperthyroidism. It's a side effect of Coumadin. Okay? This story says, oh, this is a common occurrence. This just happens to her. And, oh, by the way, she takes this and this and this and a blood thinner named Coumadin. She takes this and this because of that. Now, why does she take that? Because her doctor thinks she's going to have a stroke if she hasn't already had it. So it matters today in the exact same way. Everything could change because this is what they tell us about. What are they not telling us? The only reason for that is to stop people from having strokes. Any comments? What's that? Oh, I wanted to talk about the war plan. Another thing that changed after World War I, there wasn't really radio. There wasn't television, obviously. There was the only way that people could really express themselves, artists could express themselves either by writing or painting or singing or poetry. Poetry isn't as important these days because most of the time it winds up in songs. But back then, okay, so here this is a poem from a guy who was in the war. It was actually written during the war. Flanders is one of the places where the British Army fought. Between these crosses drawn are that mark our place in the sky, the larks still bravely sing. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, fell dawn, saw sunset glow. Okay. This is not poetry of let's win the war, it's going to be a great thing. This is poetry that says, what in the hell are we doing? Okay, this is we talk about art being a revulsion of previous art. This is previous politics. Okay, this is saying, what on earth? Why? How did we get here? Yes. The first sentence is the one that really grabbed me. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? They're talking about their soul. Okay. That says that the people who sent them to fight had no idea what they were doing, and sent them to die as if they were cattle to be slaughtered. Had no, here are young men who had wives, had girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, and they were just thrown into a big meat grinder. So when I said World War I is this demarcation. Everything changes after World War I. It doesn't even change that much after World War II, because this is the change from the past of evolution, the past of when we talked about types of change. Okay, this said no more of ever increasing niceness, no more of things will get better and better and better and better. This says we have no idea. And it could be terrible. This is the future that we recognize. We recognize utopia and dystopia. This is saying that. This is saying that the people who plan our society have no idea what they're doing. And we should recognize that and not trust them anymore. That's a huge change. Not trusting the government. Well, it used to be illegal, literally, to not trust the government. Start that. So, one of the solutions was an art movement in Germany in the late 1910s, called the Bauhaus School, and it was called Bauhaus, but that's what it's called. This is the curriculum. Okay, I want you to look at this curriculum and look at how this is completely different from the way that even today we talk about curriculum. They're intending to study art and design. And in fact, I remember there's yes. The other part of the assignment this week is to watch a video called the Genius of Design, which talks about, in part, the Bauhaus. These things are actually fun to watch. So we're all used to hierarchical schemes, right? Take that class, and then you take that class, and then you take that class, and then you take that class, and it's all, you start here 111 for your computer science is 111, and then 112, 205, which may actually be over here. I don't know. This is a whole different way of looking at it. Okay? We start on the outside and work our way in. So we start and look at what things are put together. Okay. So especially on the next to last circle, textile, weaving, and fashion. Okay, that's the first time anybody had ever decided that the people who make the clothes should also know about fashion. Usually there was a designer who would say, it should look like this, and the weaver would go off and do it. These guys are saying the designers should also be weavers. They should know what's going on. Color, painting, and decorating. Okay? Painters should be decorators. That's a whole different view. Usually the decorators pick the painting. Now the painters pick the decoration. That's a different way of looking at everything. About philosophy. You should think about what existentialism is, or just look it up, and think about how come such a revulsion of morality. Existentialism says that I decide what's moral. It's up to me. That's entirely different than the church decides. Well, my parents decide. I decide. That still comes out of World War I. Because don't trust anybody. They're all going to get you killed. Okay. How did this new change of art affect city planning?
You want to answer that right now?
Yes.
Okay. How does this new affect?
We have this new Bauhausy school. We have this new idea that it's all some sort of big conglomeration, that the specialization is not necessarily the right thing to do. So, and let's throw in existentialism, where I decide what's good. How does that change city planning?
So for city planning, I know around this time a lot of the cities were being started being constructed and built up.
Well, they were being the more agrarian looking cities, yes. So we're seeing the rise of things like suburbs and things like that. Go ahead.
And so like landlords and stuff like that, I feel like they could have like a big part in like how they treat their residents. They're feeling like it doesn't really matter, and especially as you mentioned that people are now thinking more into now that they can just like the prices go up, it'd be harder to live there. You could only attract like certain groups of people that had the money, and I know it's back then the money.
I see. Okay, I see. You're saying that the economic the cities are being driven by economic stratification, essentially.
Yeah.
That wasn't the answer I was looking for, but it's a good one. And he's right. I mean, think about New York City. New York City, basically, downtown becomes where the rich people live. And uptown is where the rich people don't live. North of Central Park. That's very interesting. Let's try one more person. Anybody else want to volunteer? Okay. Yeah, see, everybody hates this for a while, and then they realize that they only have a 1 in chance to get called up. So, what do you think?
I think that if we tie everything to existentialism, then that could be very similar to what he said, like the landlord part.
I want you to say something different.
Yeah, but it would be somewhat different because then you couldn't live in a community because it's so much interdependent on each other.
Oh, now that's interesting. That's an alienation theme. Oh, no, that's very interesting. I didn't think about that. I thought that would happen after World War II, but you could be right. Okay? Existentialism means alienation. If I'm the one who decides, I don't need you. I don't need a community anymore. I mean, when we get into people like Nietzsche who really went bananas with this, but he's right. Okay? I don't need the church anymore. I don't need the community of the church. I am my own person. I can make my own decisions. That's an interesting idea. So it doesn't change the design of cities, but it changes the attitude of people who live in it. Very interesting. See, I like that when you guys think of things I didn't think of. I like that. Anybody else? What's that? About 20 minutes? Is it 4:40 or 4:20? Don't lie.
What was the question?
We have existentialism, we have alienation by the artists, we have a need to build cities because the cities need to be replaced because of changes in industrialization, which we didn't talk about. So we need new cities, but we we have to decide how to build them. What do you think what was the outcome of all of this ferment in philosophy and art and decorating and design? What do we see in cities that would reflect that?
Skyscrapers.
Skyscrapers, okay. Steel becomes possible to build tall things, and now we build these giant warehouses for people. It's a whole different view of people now. Now it's not a home. It's a box I live in. That's just like all the other boxes in this big, tall thing I live in, with all these other people who I don't know who they are. And if you live in an apartment, do you know anything about anybody who lives near you? Probably not. You might know the people who live next to you just because, hey, how are you? And you can hear them through the wall. But yes, skyscrapers. And we see that theme following all the way through to the urban renewal stuff of the 1960s and 70s. Okay? That idea of the tall building is good because it gets you more people in a smaller space overruns the idea of, well, it's a lousy place to live. And so what do we see now? We see these giant urban renewals where these giant apartment blocks are being torn down and things are being made into like bungalow, duplex kind of things. Places people want to live as opposed to places people have to live. Okay? But out of the ferment comes, from the war, comes this, I don't want those homes, okay? That the home of, my own home and that kind of thing, as opposed to my apartment, is from before the war. So they don't want that. I want the future. I want to see that. I want to see the future. I want to see things that aren't like what they were before. And so I'll make these giant, if you like, warehouses for people because they'll live there because they have to, but they have some place to live. What's this?
I think that makes sense on the toilet scene.
Well, I'm pretty sure if you look it up in the dictionary, that's not what it says. Okay. When do you think that was? When do you think that was invented?
1980.
Wrong. Good guess.
1930s.
Still wrong.
18 something.
No, no electricity in the 1800s. The year 4.
Yeah.
You're, okay. 1919. It was originally invented as a proximity alarm. In other words, the closer I get to it, so I just don't put this through a speaker, but I can have something that listens to that sound. And if someone gets close, somebody's trying to get in my door. But the guy who designed it was a guy named Theremin. He was a Russian radio engineer. And if you if you go to YouTube sometime and look for Led Zeppelin theremin, you will discover that theremins are in use to this day as for sound effects, but also as musical instruments. Because you can play it up and down and give it warbling, you heard that, and different sounds. So you can actually play songs. Yeah, there's I forget this. Anyway, if you look for it on YouTube. But anyway, this was seized upon as a new instrument. This was an instrument that didn't require you to know any music. I can just hear it. Like, I don't have to read music anymore. What have we seen in the last 20 years or so that's kind of like that? Where I don't need to read music to make music. Kind of. True, I mean, you can just sort of wave your hand. I was thinking more about rap music. Okay, rap music is poetry with somebody else's music. So the rap artist doesn't have to know music. It helps if he does, but he doesn't have to. So that's sort of an echo of this, where this is a revulsion of music as Mozart and so forth. This says anybody can play. You don't have to learn, how to read music. You don't have to play the piano. You can just walk up to this thing and play music. But anyway, and what do we see? Okay, one more thing. What do we see today that is very similar to that attitude? I even used the word already. And this will be, I swear, this is the last question. You'll find if you stare at me long enough, I just keep going. You too. Do I need a director, a cinematographer, a writer? YouTube, yeah. Okay. I don't need any of that stuff. I need a camera and me. And I can make a movie. I can make a movie that's pretty damn entertaining. Okay, there are people who are, stars who get their start in music. Anybody hear the Hillywood, the Hilly sisters? Hilly and Holly Hindi? Oh, look them up on. They do these wonderful parodies of TV shows. Wonderful, with music videos and dancing. And, it's amazing. And it's just them, their friends, who fortunately they live in Hollywood, but their friends and a camera, and they just post them on YouTube. That didn't used to happen anymore. It used to be you had to have 20 years of experience and a degree from NYU, and not anymore. The technology has taken that away. Now you can be expressive on your own, and nobody can tell you that it sucks. Except people who come. All right, enough. All right, I'll just keep talking. Get away from me. It's safe. Thank you all.